The August sun bore down mercilessly on Helena Carson as she knelt beside the creek, her calloused hands gripping two smooth river rocks that had become as familiar to her as her own reflection. She had been grinding corn between these stones since dawn, her shoulders aching with each circular motion, the meager pile of coarse flour beside her representing hours of backbreaking work. It was 1878 in Platteville, Colorado, a town barely clinging to existence on the edge of the Colorado Territory's endless plains, where survival meant accepting whatever hardships the land threw at you without complaint. Helena paused to wipe the sweat from her brow with the back of her flour-dusted hand, leaving a white streak across her sun-bronzed skin. At 23 years old, she had already buried a husband, lost a homestead to drought, and rebuilt her life from nothing in this unforgiving corner of the West. The small plot of land she now occupied sat 2 miles outside of Platteville proper, close enough to the South Platte River to draw water but far enough from town that she rarely saw another soul for days at a time. Her cabin was modest, little more than rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and prairie grass, but it was hers, purchased with the last of her savings and her own sweat equity. The corn she ground today had come from her own small garden, painstakingly irrigated with buckets hauled from the creek. Every kernel represented her determination to survive, to make something of herself in a world that seemed designed to crush women like her beneath its heel. She ground the corn into flour that she could use for bread, for trading at the general store in town, for bartering with the few neighbors scattered across the prairie. The work was endless, exhausting, and soul-crushing in its monotony, but Helena had learned long ago that self-pity was a luxury she could not afford. As the sun climbed higher, Helena finally sat back on her heels, examining the flour she had produced. Perhaps 2 cups worth, after nearly 5 hours of work. Her back screamed in protest as she straightened, her knees popping audibly in the stillness of the afternoon. She gathered the flour carefully into a clean cloth sack, not willing to lose a single precious grain to the wind or the dirt. This flour would make bread for the next 3 days, if she was careful. After that, she would be back at the creek with her rocks, grinding until her hands bled and her vision blurred with fatigue. The sound of wagon wheels on the rutted trail that passed near her property made Helena's head snap up in surprise. Visitors were rare out here, and unexpected ones even more so. She shaded her eyes against the sun, squinting at the approaching wagon. It was a sturdy freight wagon pulled by 2 massive draft horses, their coats gleaming with sweat in the afternoon heat. The man driving the wagon sat tall on the bench, his broad shoulders outlined against the cloudless sky, his hat pulled low over his face. Helena felt a flutter of anxiety in her chest. A woman alone on the prairie was vulnerable in ways that kept her up at night, though she kept a loaded rifle in her cabin and knew how to use it. She stood slowly, brushing the flour dust from her worn calico dress, and waited as the wagon drew closer. The driver appeared to be alone, which was somewhat reassuring, and as he drew near enough for her to make out his features, she was surprised to see a young face beneath the weathered hat. The wagon rolled to a stop near her cabin, and the driver tipped his hat to her with a gesture that seemed almost courtly despite his dusty trail clothes. "Madam," he said, his voice a pleasant baritone that carried across the space between them. "Name's Xavier Ortiz. I apologize for the intrusion, but I was hoping you might be able to spare some water for my horses. It's been a long haul from Denver, and we've got another stretch before we reach town." Helena studied him carefully. Xavier Ortiz looked to be perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his hat and eyes the color of strong coffee. His face was honest, she thought, with none of the hardness or cruelty she had learned to recognize in dangerous men. His clothes were worn but clean, his hands on the reins competent and gentle with the horses. "The creek is just there," Helena said, gesturing toward the water where she had been working. "Help yourself. Your horses look like they could use it." "Much obliged," Xavier said, climbing down from the wagon with an easy grace. He was taller than she had expected, well over 6 feet, with the lean, muscular build of a man who made his living with his hands. He led the horses toward the creek, speaking to them in low, soothing tones that made Helena think he was a man who treated animals with kindness. As Xavier watered the horses, his eyes fell on the 2 river rocks beside the creek, still dusted with corn flour, and the small pile of kernels waiting to be ground. He was quiet for a long moment, then turned to look at Helena with an expression she could not quite read. "You grind your flour with river rocks?" he asked, and there was no judgment in his voice, only what sounded like genuine curiosity tinged with something else. Concern, perhaps, or sympathy. Helena felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. She had not realized how primitive her setup must look to someone else, to a man who had clearly just come from Denver with a wagon full of goods. "It serves," she said shortly, lifting her chin in defiance of whatever pity he might be feeling. "I make do with what I have." Xavier said nothing for a moment, then turned back to his horses, checking their hooves and running his hands over their legs with the practiced attention of someone who depended on these animals for his livelihood. When he was satisfied that they were sound, he led them back to the wagon and stood there for a long moment, his hand resting on the wagon's side, clearly thinking about something. "Madam, would you mind if I asked you a question?" he said finally. Helena crossed her arms over her chest, suddenly very aware of how she must look, dusty and sweating, her dress faded and patched in multiple places. "I suppose that depends on the question. How long have you been grinding flour like that?" Xavier asked, nodding toward the creek. "Since I moved here last spring," Helena said. "I had a proper mill back in Kansas before my husband died and the bank took the farm. Out here, I work with what I can afford, which is to say, whatever the good Lord saw fit to scatter along the creek bed." Xavier nodded slowly, then walked to the back of his wagon and began untying the canvas that covered his cargo. Helena watched with growing curiosity as he pulled back the covering to reveal his freight. Farming implements, tools, sacks of seed, and there, secured with heavy ropes in the center of the wagon bed, a millstone. It was not a large millstone, perhaps 18 inches across, but it was beautifully made, with a smooth grinding surface and a wooden frame that would allow it to be turned by hand. Even from where she stood, Helena could see that it was a quality piece, the kind of tool that could transform the back-breaking work of grinding grain into something manageable, efficient, almost easy. "I picked this up in Denver," Xavier said, running his hand over the stone's surface. "Was planning to take it to Platteville to sell, but the truth is, millstones are not exactly in high demand in a town that already has a working gristmill. Most folks just take their grain to old Mr. Henderson and pay him to grind it." "That costs money," Helena said quietly. "Money I do not have to spare." Xavier met her eyes and something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. Here were 2 people who knew what it meant to struggle, to scrimp and save, to make every penny count because the difference between survival and ruin was often just a few dollars. "I would like to make you an offer," Xavier said slowly. "I will give you this millstone, and in exchange, you give me a place to rest for the night before I head into town tomorrow. My horses are tired, I'm tired, and the truth is, I have been on the trail for 3 days straight and could use a decent meal and a chance to sleep somewhere other than the hard ground." Helena stared at him, trying to make sense of what he was proposing. A millstone like that was worth at least $20, possibly more. A night's lodging and a meal could not possibly be equal compensation. "That makes no sense," she said bluntly. "You would be cheating yourself terribly on that bargain." Xavier shrugged, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Maybe I am just a terrible businessman. Or maybe I figure that watching someone break their back grinding flour with river rocks when I have the means to help does not sit right with me. Call it Christian charity if you like." Helena felt a lump forming in her throat, and she swallowed hard against it. Pride warred with desperate need inside her chest. The millstone would change her life, would free up hours of her day for other work, would produce better flour that she could sell or trade for things she needed. But accepting such a gift from a stranger felt wrong, felt like she was taking advantage of his kindness. "I cannot accept charity," she said, her voice rougher than she intended. "I have made my own way since I was 18 years old, and I do not intend to start taking handouts now." "It is not a handout," Xavier said firmly. "It is a trade. You provide me with hospitality, I provide you with a tool you need. That's how things work out here, isn't it? Neighbors helping neighbors, folks trading what they have for what they need. We are not neighbors," Helena pointed out. "You are just passing through." "Well," Xavier said, that smile growing a bit wider, "maybe that will change. I am actually looking for a place to settle around here. I have been working as a freighter for the past 5 years, saving my money, and I have finally got enough put together to buy some land and start my own ranch. Platteville seems like a good place for it, and if that is the case, then we will be neighbors." Helena looked at the millstone again, then back at Xavier's honest, open face. There was something about him that made her want to trust him, though she had learned the hard way that trust was a dangerous thing to give too freely. But there was also something in his eyes, a kindness that seemed genuine, that made her think perhaps this was one of those rare moments when the universe offered a helping hand instead of another slap in the face. "One night," she said finally. "You can camp here by the creek. I will cook you supper, and in the morning you can be on your way. But I insist on paying you properly for the millstone when I am able. I will keep a record of the debt." Xavier's smile became a full grin, transforming his face from merely handsome to genuinely striking. "Deal," he said, offering his hand to shake on it. Helena hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and calloused in a way that spoke of hard work and honest labor. She felt a strange flutter in her stomach at the contact, something she had not experienced since her husband had died 3 years ago, and she pulled her hand back quickly, unnerved by her own reaction. Xavier seemed not to notice her confusion. He turned back to the wagon and began the process of unloading the millstone, which was clearly a 2-person job. Helena hurried forward to help, and together they maneuvered the heavy stone down from the wagon bed and carried it toward her cabin. It took both of them straining with effort to get it positioned on her small porch, where she could set it up properly later. When the millstone was finally in place, Helena stood back to look at it, barely able to believe it was really there, really hers. She reached out to touch the smooth stone surface, running her fingers over the finely carved grooves that would help grind the grain. It was beautiful, functional, perfect. "Thank you," she said quietly, and the words felt inadequate for the gratitude she felt. "You are welcome," Xavier replied, and something in his voice made her look up at him. He was watching her with an expression that was almost tender, and for a moment they simply stood there, 2 strangers connected by an act of unexpected kindness. The moment broke when Xavier's stomach growled audibly, and he laughed, pressing a hand to his midsection. "Sorry. Like I said, it's been 3 days of jerky and hardtack. A home-cooked meal sounds like heaven right about now." Helena felt herself smile, really smile, for the first time in longer than she could remember. "Well, I cannot promise anything fancy, but I can make a decent stew and some cornbread. Though," she added with a wry look at her pile of ground flour by the creek, "the cornbread might be a bit coarse this time. Tomorrow, with the Millstone, it will be much better." "I am sure it will be delicious," Xavier said warmly. "Can I help with anything?" "I am a fair hand at cooking over a campfire." They spent the next hour working together in a surprisingly comfortable silence. Xavier unhitched his horses and led them to a patch of grass near the creek where they could graze, while Helena gathered ingredients for supper. She had a small garden that had yielded beans, onions, and some scraggly potatoes, and she had a bit of salt pork that she had been saving for a special occasion. This, she decided, qualified. As she worked, she found herself sneaking glances at Xavier as he moved around her property, caring for his animals and setting up a simple camp near the creek. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of experience, wasting no energy on unnecessary flourishes. He clearly knew how to take care of himself on the trail, and she appreciated that. Too many men she had known expected women to wait on them hand and foot, as if they were helpless children incapable of boiling water without supervision. When the stew was bubbling over her outdoor fire and the cornbread was baking in her Dutch oven, Helena called Xavier over. He had washed up in the creek and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle and tanned dark from the sun. He settled himself on a log near the fire, and Helena handed him a tin cup of coffee that she had been hoarding for weeks. "This is nice," Xavier said, sipping the coffee and looking around at her property with apparent approval. "You have done well for yourself here. This land has good water, decent soil for a garden, and you are close enough to town to trade but far enough out to have privacy. That takes planning and good sense." Helena felt a warm glow of pride at his words. "It was not easy," she admitted. "When I first got here, I was living in a tent while I built the cabin. Took me 3 months to get it weatherproof, and I am still making improvements when I can afford the materials." "You built that cabin yourself?" Xavier asked, his eyebrows rising in surprise. "Most of it," Helena said. "A neighbor helped me with the roof, but the rest I managed on my own. I learned a lot about construction that I never expected to know." Xavier shook his head in apparent admiration. "That is impressive, truly. Most people, men or women, would not have the grit to do what you have done." They fell into conversation as the sun began to set, painting the Colorado sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Helena found herself talking more than she had in months, telling Xavier about her life in Kansas, about the husband she had married at 19 who had been kind but not particularly ambitious, about the way the drought had slowly strangled their farm until there was nothing left to hold on to. She told him about the decision to come west after he died, about the determination to make a new life for herself on her own terms. Xavier, in turn, told her about growing up on a small ranch in New Mexico territory, about losing his parents to influenza when he was 17, about the years he had spent working as a freighter to save enough money to start his own place. His dream, he said, was to raise cattle to build something that would last, something he could be proud of. "I am tired of wandering," he said, staring into the fire. "I have seen enough of the West to know that what I want is right here. Good land, honest work, a community of people trying to build something together. Platteville may not be much now, but it has potential. In 10 years, it could be a real town, with schools and churches and all the things that make a place worth staying in. You have given this a lot of thought, Helena observed. I have had a lot of time to think, Xavier replied. When you are alone on the trail for weeks at a time, you have nothing but your own thoughts for company. It gives you perspective on what matters. They ate the stew as darkness fell, and Helena was pleased to see Xavier take second and third helpings, clearly enjoying the simple meal. The cornbread was indeed coarse, but he ate it without complaint, spreading it with a bit of honey she had traded for at the general store months ago. After supper, they sat by the fire while the stars emerged one by one in the vast Colorado sky. Helena had forgotten how pleasant it could be to have company, to hear another voice besides her own, to share the quiet evening with someone who seemed to genuinely enjoy her presence. "Can I ask you something?" Xavier said after a long, comfortable silence. "You can ask," Helena replied. "I may not answer." Xavier smiled at that. "Fair enough. I was wondering, why did you not remarry after your husband died? A woman like you, capable and hardworking and," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, "easy on the eyes, you must have had offers." Helena felt her cheeks warm, grateful for the darkness that hid her blush. "I had some offers," she admitted, "but none from men who wanted a partner. They wanted a cook, a housekeeper, someone to warm their bed and bear their children. I had that once, and while my husband was not a bad man, I found that I did not particularly enjoy being treated like a piece of property. When he died and I was finally free to make my own choices, I decided I would rather be alone than give up that freedom for a man who did not see me as an equal." Xavier nodded slowly. "I can understand that. Too many men out here think that having a wife means having a servant who also happens to share your bed. That is not what marriage should be. And what do you think marriage should be?" Helena asked, surprised by her own boldness in asking the question. Xavier was quiet for a moment, gazing into the fire. "I think it should be a partnership," he said finally. "Two people who respect each other, who work together toward common goals, who choose each other every day instead of just being stuck with each other out of obligation. My parents had that kind of marriage. They made decisions together, supported each other's dreams, and they were genuinely happy. That is what I want, if I am ever lucky enough to find it." Helena felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of a knot she had not even realized she was carrying. Here was a man who thought the way she did, who valued the things she valued, who seemed to see women as human beings rather than possessions. It was rare enough to be shocking, and she found herself reassessing Xavier Ortiz with new eyes. "That is a good answer," she said softly. They talked late into the night, long after the fire had burned down to embers. Helena learned that Xavier spoke fluent Spanish from his mother, that he had a gift for working with horses, that he loved to read but rarely had the chance. Xavier learned that Helena had taught herself basic arithmetic, to manage her finances, that she had a talent for growing things even in difficult soil, that she dreamed of one day having enough land to plant an orchard. When Helena finally stood and announced that she needed to sleep, Xavier rose as well. "Thank you for the hospitality," he said. "This has been one of the best evenings I have had in a very long time." "I should be thanking you," Helena replied. "For the Millstone, for the company, for treating me like a person worth talking to." "You are definitely worth talking to," Xavier said, and there was something in his voice that made Helena's heart skip a beat. "I hope we can do it again sometime." Helena lay in her bed that night, staring at the rough ceiling of her cabin and thinking about Xavier Ortiz. She told herself that it was foolish to feel anything for a man she had just met, a man who would be gone in the morning, heading into Platteville to conduct his business, and then probably moving on to wherever his freight route took him. but she could not deny that something had happened tonight. Some connection that felt significant in a way she did not fully understand. She woke before dawn, as she always did, and stepped out of her cabin to find Xavier already up and moving, checking on his horses and preparing to hitch them to the wagon. He looked up when he heard her door open and offered her a warm smile. "Morning," he said. "I was trying to be quiet so I would not wake you." "I am always up early," Helena replied. "Old habits. Can I make you some breakfast before you go?" "I would like that," Xavier said, and Helena felt a disproportionate amount of pleasure at his answer. They ate a simple breakfast of fried mush and eggs from Helena's small flock of chickens, and then it was time for Xavier to leave. Helena walked him to his wagon, suddenly reluctant to see him go. "I will be in Platteville for a few days," Xavier said as he climbed up onto the wagon bench. "I have deliveries to make and some business to conduct. But I was wondering if I might stop by again on my way back through. Maybe see how you are getting on with that Millstone." Helena felt her heart lift. "I would like that," she said, trying to keep her voice casual even though she felt anything but casual about the prospect. "Good," Xavier said, his smile bright enough to rival the rising sun. "I will see you soon then. Take care of yourself, Helena." He used her first name, she realized, even though she had only introduced herself as Mrs. Carson. Somehow it felt right, felt like they had moved beyond formalities into something more familiar, more friendly. Helena watched the wagon roll away until it disappeared down the trail, and only then did she turn back to her property, to the Millstone sitting on her porch like a promise of better things to come. She spent the morning setting it up properly, building a sturdy table to hold it and testing it with the remaining corn she had yet to grind. The difference was astonishing. What would have taken her hours with the river rocks took mere minutes with the Millstone, and the flour it produced was fine and even perfect for baking. As she worked, Helena found her thoughts returning again and again to Xavier. She tried to tell herself that she was being ridiculous. That one pleasant evening and a generous gift did not mean anything significant, but she could not quite make herself believe it. There had been something in the way he looked at her, the way he listened when she spoke, the way he treated her with respect and genuine interest that felt different from any interaction she had had with a man in years. The next 3 days passed slowly. Helena threw herself into her work, using the Millstone to grind enough flour to take into town for trading. She baked bread that was better than any she had made in months, light and tender thanks to the fine flour. She tended her garden, mended her fences, and tried not to think about when Xavier might return. On the 4th day, she was hanging washing on the line she had strung between 2 posts when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. Her heart leaped into her throat as she turned to see Xavier riding toward her on a sturdy buckskin gelding, no wagon in sight this time. He dismounted with easy grace and walked toward her, his smile warm and his eyes bright. "Hello again," he said. "I hope I am not intruding." "Not at all," Helena said, setting down her wash basket and wiping her damp hands on her apron. "I am glad you came back." "I finished my business in town earlier than I expected," Xavier said. "Sold most of my freight, made some good contacts, and I have been asking around about available land. There is a parcel about 5 miles from here that might suit my purposes. I rode out to look at it yesterday, and it seems promising." "So you are really going to settle here," Helena said, and she could not keep the pleasure out of her voice. "Looks that way," Xavier confirmed. "Which means we really will be neighbors. I wanted to stop by and see how the Millstone was working out for you." "It is wonderful," Helena said enthusiastically. "You cannot imagine what a difference it makes. Come, I will show you." She led him to the porch where the Millstone was set up. demonstrating how smoothly it turned and how fine the flour it produced. Xavier watched with apparent interest, asking questions about how she had secured it and whether she needed any adjustments to make it work better. "It is perfect," Helena assured him. "Truly, you have changed my life with this gift. I have been able to produce enough flour in the past few days to trade for supplies I desperately needed, and the quality is so much better than what I was making before." "I am glad," Xavier said, and he looked genuinely pleased. "I have been thinking about you a lot since I left." Helena felt her breath catch. "You have," Xavier nodded, suddenly looking almost shy, which was endearing on such a large, capable man. "I have. The truth is, Helena, I have not been able to get you out of my mind. The way you have built a life for yourself out here, your strength and independence, the way you light up when you talk about your plans for the future. I find myself wanting to know more about you, wanting to spend more time with you." Helena's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I have been thinking about you too," she admitted. "More than I probably should, given that we barely know each other." "Then maybe we should fix that," Xavier suggested. "Get to know each other better. I am going to be around for a while, getting the land purchase sorted out and starting to build my ranch. I would very much like to spend some of that time with you if you are willing." Helena found herself nodding before she had consciously decided to do so. "I would like that," she said. "Very much." Xavier's smile was brilliant. "Good. In that case, would you do me the honor of having supper with me in town tomorrow evening? There is a decent restaurant, nothing fancy, but the food is supposed to be good." "I would love to," Helena said, feeling a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. It had been so long since she had done anything like this, since she had allowed herself to feel anything for a man beyond wariness and mistrust. They made arrangements for Xavier to pick her up the following evening, and then he stayed for a while, helping her with some repairs to her chicken coop that she had been struggling to manage on her own. They worked well together, she noticed, anticipating each other's movements and communicating easily. By the time Xavier left, promising to see her the next day, Helena felt like she was floating. That night, she pulled out her best dress, a deep blue calico that she had been saving for special occasions. It was faded in places and had been mended more than once, but it was clean and decent, and it brought out the color of her eyes. She tried it on, examining herself critically in the small mirror she owned. She looked thin, she thought, and too tanned from working in the sun, but there was a glow to her face that had not been there before, a spark of happiness that transformed her features. Xavier arrived exactly when he said he would, riding up on his buckskin horse and leading a pretty chestnut mare that he said was gentle and easy to ride. He helped Helena mount, his hand steadying her with a touch that sent tingles through her entire body, and they rode into Platteville together as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The restaurant was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and oil lamps that cast a warm glow over the diners. Xavier pulled out Helena's chair for her, a courtesy that made her feel cherished, and they ordered roast chicken with potatoes and carrots. The food was good, but Helena barely tasted it, too caught up in the conversation and the way Xavier looked at her across the table, like she was the most fascinating person he had ever met. They talked about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their hopes for the future, their opinions on politics and religion and the state of the world. Helena was surprised to find that they agreed on most things, sharing values and perspectives that made the conversation flow naturally. Xavier was intelligent and thoughtful, but he also had a sense of humor that made her laugh, something she realized she had not done nearly enough of in recent years. After dinner, they walked down Platteville's Main Street, which was really just a dusty road lined with a few stores and saloons. Xavier kept a respectful distance, but stayed close enough that Helena felt protected, aware of his presence beside her in a way that was both comforting and thrilling. "I have really enjoyed tonight," Xavier said as they paused near the hitching post where their horses waited. "You are an amazing woman, Helena, strong and smart and beautiful, and I feel incredibly fortunate to have met you." Helena felt tears prick at her eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. "I have enjoyed it too," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I did not realize how lonely I had been until I had someone to share things with again." Xavier reached out and gently took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a gesture that was tender and tentative. "I would like to keep sharing things with you if you will let me. I know we have not known each other long, but I feel something when I am with you, something I have never felt before. I do not want to rush you or pressure you, but I want you to know that my interest is genuine." "I feel it too," Helena whispered, "and it scares me a little if I am being honest. The last time I let myself care about someone, I ended up losing him and everything we had built together. I do not know if I am ready to risk that kind of pain again." Xavier squeezed her hand gently. "I cannot promise that nothing bad will ever happen, because life does not work that way. But I can promise that I will always be honest with you, that I will treat you with respect, and that I will never take you for granted. You deserve someone who sees your worth, Helena, and I do. I see it clearly." They stood there for a long moment, hands clasped, looking into each other's eyes in the gathering darkness. Helena felt something inside her shift, a wall she had built around her heart beginning to crumble. She had been so focused on protecting herself, on maintaining her independence and avoiding pain, that she had forgotten what it felt like to let someone in, to take a risk on connection and intimacy. "I would like to keep seeing you," she said finally, "to see where this might go." Xavier's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "That makes me very happy," he said. He helped her mount her horse, and they rode back to her property together, the night air cool and sweet with the scent of prairie grass and sage. When they reached her cabin, Xavier dismounted and helped Helena down, his hands lingering on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "Can I see you again soon?" he asked. "Yes," Helena said. "Anytime you like." Xavier grinned. "How about tomorrow? I could come by in the morning and help you with whatever work you need done around here. I am going to be spending a lot of time getting my own place set up, but I would rather spend my free time with you than alone." "Tomorrow would be wonderful," Helena agreed. Xavier rode away into the darkness, and Helena stood on her porch, watching until she could no longer see him. Then she went inside, hugged herself, and allowed herself to feel the full rush of emotions that had been building all evening. Hope, excitement, joy, and yes, a little fear. But the fear felt manageable now, overshadowed by the possibility of something beautiful. True to his word, Xavier appeared the next morning just as Helena was finishing her breakfast. They spent the day working together on her property, and Helena was amazed at how much they accomplished. Xavier helped her shore up the walls of her chicken coop, making it secure against predators. He repaired a section of fence that had been sagging. He even helped her dig a new irrigation ditch from the creek to her garden, work that would have taken her days to complete alone, but that they managed in a single afternoon working side by side. As they worked, they talked constantly, learning more about each other with every passing hour. Xavier told her about his plans for his ranch, his dream of raising high-quality cattle that he could sell to the growing beef markets in Denver and beyond. Helena shared her hopes of expanding her garden into a small farm, maybe getting a few pigs and a dairy cow, selling produce and butter to folks in town. "We could help each other," Xavier said as they took a break in the afternoon, sitting in the shade of Helena's cabin and sharing water from her well. "Once I get my place up and running, I am going to need vegetables to feed my ranch hands. You could supply them, and I would pay you fair market prices. It would give you a reliable customer and save me the trouble of going into town for supplies." "That sounds like a good arrangement," Helena said, pleased by the practicality of it. But beneath the practical considerations, she heard what he was really saying. That he was thinking about a future that included her, that he was already imagining ways their lives could intertwine. Over the following weeks, Xavier became a constant presence in Helena's life. He divided his time between working on his own property and helping Helena with hers, and she found herself looking forward to his visits with an eagerness that sometimes frightened her with its intensity. They fell into an easy rhythm, working together during the day and often sharing meals in the evening, sitting by the fire and talking until the stars came out. Helena met Xavier's horses, learning their names and personalities, and Xavier taught her some of the finer points of horsemanship. She showed him her garden, explaining her planting strategies and the tricks she had learned for coaxing vegetables from the challenging Colorado soil. They shared knowledge and skills, each teaching the other things they had learned through hard experience. As summer turned toward fall, the landscape around them transformed into shades of gold and amber. Xavier's ranch began to take shape. A small cabin, a barn, corrals for the horses and cattle he planned to buy. Helena helped when she could, and Xavier continued to help her with her never-ending list of tasks. They were building their lives side by side, she realized, even though they had not yet defined exactly what their relationship was. One evening in late September, as they sat by the fire at Helena's place, Xavier turned to her with an expression that was serious and tender at once. "Helena, I need to tell you something." She felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. "What is it?" "I love you," Xavier said simply. "I have been falling in love with you since the day I met you, and I cannot keep it to myself any longer. I love your strength, your determination, your kindness. I love the way you laugh at my bad jokes and the way you concentrate when you are working on something difficult. I love how you never give up, no matter how hard things get. I love you, and I want to build a future with you." Helena felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking. "I have been so afraid to admit it, afraid to let myself feel this much for anyone, but I do. I love you, Xavier." Xavier crossed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Helena buried her face in his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and steady beneath her cheek. This was real, she thought. This was happening. She had found someone who saw her, truly saw her, and loved her for exactly who she was. Xavier tilted her face up to his and kissed her, a kiss that was gentle and passionate and full of promise. Helena kissed him back, pouring all of her feelings into that moment, all of her hope and love and trust. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, I know we have only known each other a few months, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to spend every day with you, building our lives together. Say you will marry me, Helena." Helena's answer came without hesitation. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." They were married in October of 1878 in Platteville's small church, with a handful of neighbors and townspeople in attendance. Helena wore a new dress that Xavier had bought for her in Denver, a beautiful cream-colored gown with delicate lace at the collar. Xavier wore a new suit, looking handsome and nervous as he waited for her at the altar. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her with a tenderness that made several of the women in attendance sigh wistfully. The newlyweds decided to live at Xavier's ranch, which had more space and better facilities than Helena's small cabin. They spent their first weeks of marriage settling in together, learning how to share a space and a life. Helena discovered that Xavier snored softly in his sleep and that he liked his coffee strong and black. Xavier learned that Helena sang quietly to herself when she was content, and that she had a habit of organizing things in very specific ways. They worked together to build their ranch into something successful. Xavier bought his first herd of cattle, and Helena expanded her garden into a large plot that produced more vegetables than they could possibly use themselves, allowing her to sell the surplus in town. She got her dairy cow and her pigs, and Xavier built her the finest chicken coop in the county, one that was secure and spacious and easy to clean. Their first winter together was hard, with bitter cold and heavy snows that sometimes kept them housebound for days at a time. But Helena found that she did not mind being trapped inside with Xavier, that she loved those quiet days when they could simply be together, reading by the fire or talking about their plans for the spring. Xavier proved to be everything he had promised, a true partner who valued her opinions, consulted her on major decisions, and never made her feel like anything less than his equal. In the spring of 1879, Helena discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. She had never been pregnant before, and the dangers of childbirth were well known to every woman on the frontier. But Xavier's excitement and support helped calm her fears. He was attentive and careful, taking on more of the heavy work so she would not have to strain herself, bringing her little gifts from town to make her smile. Their son was born in November of 1879, a healthy baby boy with dark hair like his father and his mother's determined chin. They named him Samuel, and Xavier cried when he held his son for the first time, tears of pure joy running down his face. Helena watched her husband cradling their child and felt her heart swell with love so intense it was almost painful. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and happy, and he brought a new dimension to their lives. Xavier proved to be a devoted father, getting up in the night to help with feedings, singing lullabies in Spanish that his own mother had once sung to him. Helena discovered reserves of strength and patience she had not known she possessed, marveling at the tiny human they had created together. As Samuel grew, the ranch prospered. Xavier's cattle herd expanded, and he gained a reputation as an honest dealer who sold quality stock. Helena's vegetable operation became essential to the local community, and she began selling eggs and butter as well, bringing in a steady income that she carefully saved and invested back into their property. They hired a few ranch hands during the busy seasons, and Xavier made sure they were paid fair wages and treated with respect. In the summer of 1881, Helena gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She had her mother's eyes and her father's smile, and Samuel, now a toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister. Xavier built additions onto their house, expanding it to accommodate their growing family. The cabin that had once been a simple bachelor's quarters became a proper home, with multiple bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a comfortable parlor. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. They celebrated holidays with their neighbors, hosted barn dances, and became pillars of the Platteville community. Xavier served on the town council, and Helena helped establish a school, determined that their children would have opportunities for education. They added to their family again in 1883 with the birth of another son, James, who proved to be adventurous and fearless from the moment he could crawl. Through it all, Helena never forgot those days of grinding flour with river rocks, never forgot the moment Xavier had rolled up in his wagon and changed her life forever. The Millstone still sat on a place of honor in their barn, and sometimes Helena would run her hands over its smooth surface and marvel at the path her life had taken. From lonely widow struggling to survive to beloved wife and mother, secure in her place in the world and surrounded by people who loved her. In 1885, Platteville was growing rapidly, becoming the thriving community Xavier had predicted it would be. The ranch was successful beyond their wildest dreams, and their children were healthy and happy. Xavier had grayed slightly at the temples, which Helena thought made him even more handsome, and he still looked at her with the same love and admiration he had shown on the day they met. One evening in late summer, they sat together on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the prairie while their children played in the yard. Samuel was nearly 6 now, responsible and thoughtful. Rose was 4, bright and curious about everything. James was 2, constantly getting into mischief and keeping them on their toes. "You ever regret it?" Xavier asked, reaching over to take Helena's hand. "Regret what?" Helena asked. "Saying yes to me that day, taking a chance on a stranger with a wagon and a millstone." Helena squeezed his hand, looking into the face of the man she loved more than life itself. "Not for a single moment. You gave me more than a millstone that day, Xavier. You gave me hope, partnership, love, and a family. You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have." "You gave me all of that too," Xavier said softly. "I was just a man with some money and a dream, but you made that dream into something real. You made me want to be better, work harder, build something lasting. Everything good in my life started the day I met you." They kissed as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, their children's laughter floating on the evening air. Helena thought about how close she had come to turning Xavier away that first day, how easily pride could have prevented her from accepting his gift. But she had taken that risk, had opened her heart to possibility, and it had led her here, to this perfect moment. In the years that followed, the Ortiz family continued to thrive. Their ranch became one of the most successful in the region, known for quality cattle and ethical business practices. Helena's farm operation expanded to include a small orchard, the dream she had once shared with Xavier finally realized. Their children grew into fine young people, educated and principled, ready to make their own marks on the world. Samuel, their eldest, showed an aptitude for ranching and business, learning everything his father could teach him about managing cattle and land. Rose proved to have her mother's gift for growing things, spending hours in the garden and orchard, experimenting with different varieties of vegetables and fruit trees. James, true to his adventurous nature, talked constantly about seeing more of the world, though he never doubted he would eventually return to Platteville to raise his own family. In 1890, Xavier and Helena celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary. They hosted a large party at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from miles around. As Helena looked around at the crowd of people, at the home they had built, at the family they had created, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction and gratitude. Later that night, after the guests had left and the children were asleep, Xavier and Helena stood in the barn where the millstone still sat. Xavier wrapped his arms around his wife from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "I still think bringing you this millstone was the best business decision I ever made," he said with a smile in his voice. Helena laughed, leaning back against him. "It certainly paid better dividends than you could have imagined." "I knew what I was doing," Xavier insisted. "I saw a beautiful woman working herself to death with river rocks, and I thought, that woman needs help. That woman needs someone to appreciate her strength and her spirit. That woman needs me, and I definitely need her." "You were pretty confident for someone I had just met," Helena teased. "I was desperate," Xavier corrected. "I knew the moment I saw you that you were special, that you were someone I wanted to know better. That Millstone was just an excuse to spend time with you, to see if you might feel even a fraction of what I was already feeling." Helena turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I felt it," she said seriously. "I was just too scared to acknowledge it at first, but you were patient with me, Xavier. You let me come to you in my own time, and you never pushed me beyond what I was ready for. That is one of the many reasons I love you." They kissed, surrounded by the tools and implements that represented their life's work, their hands rough from labor but their hearts full of love. The Millstone sat nearby, silent witness to the love story it had helped begin, a symbol of how a simple act of kindness could change the course of two lives forever. As the years continued to pass, Xavier and Helena watched their children grow into adults. Samuel married a local girl in 1895, a sweet young woman named Catherine who fit perfectly into their family. They moved into a house on the ranch property, and Samuel took over more of the day-to-day management of the cattle operation, allowing Xavier to slow down a bit as age began to catch up with him. Rose, at 18, shocked everyone by announcing her intention to go to Denver to study at a new agricultural college that was accepting female students. Helena and Xavier supported her decision wholeheartedly, proud of their daughter's ambition and determination. She returned home 2 years later with a certificate in scientific agriculture, and immediately set about modernizing the orchard and garden operations, implementing techniques she had learned that dramatically increased their yields. James, after years of talking about adventure, finally set off to see the world in 1898, at age 15. But unlike some young men who left and never looked back, James wrote faithfully to his parents and returned home every few months, full of stories about the places he had seen and the people he had met. Helena and Xavier knew he would settle down eventually, and they were content to let him explore while he was young. In 1900, Samuel and Catherine presented Xavier and Helena with their first grandchild, a girl they named Helena after her grandmother. Xavier cried again, just as he had when Samuel was born, holding his tiny granddaughter with infinite gentleness. Helena watched her husband with their grandchild and marveled at how fortunate she had been to find such a good man, such a devoted husband and father. The new century brought changes to Platteville and the surrounding area. The railroad expanded its service, making it easier to ship cattle and produce to distant markets. Automobiles began to appear on the roads, strange mechanical contraptions that Xavier viewed with suspicion and Helena with fascination. Electricity came to town, though it would be several more years before it reached their ranch. Through all these changes, Xavier and Helena remained constants in each other's lives, their love deepening with each passing year. They moved a bit slower now, their hair more gray than dark, their hands gnarled with arthritis from decades of hard work. But they still worked side by side when they could, still sat together on the porch in the evenings, still looked at each other with the love and admiration that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. In 1905, Rose married a young man she had met at the agricultural college, a fellow farmer named Thomas who shared her passion for scientific agriculture. They settled on a piece of land adjacent to the Ortiz ranch, and Rose continued to help manage the orchard and garden operations while building her own farm with her husband. The Ortiz holdings expanded, becoming a family compound where multiple generations lived and worked together in harmony. James, finally ready to settle down, returned home for good in 1906 at age 23, and married a girl from Denver he had met during his travels. They built a house on ranch property, and James took on the responsibility of managing the business side of the operation, handling contracts and negotiations with his natural charm and his father's integrity. Xavier was relieved to have someone he trusted handling the increasingly complex business aspects of ranching, allowing him to focus on the parts of the work he still enjoyed. By 1908, Xavier and Helena had 5 grandchildren, with more on the way. Their house was frequently full of noise and laughter as children ran through the rooms and played in the yard. Helena taught her granddaughters to cook and garden, passing down skills and knowledge just as Xavier taught his grandsons about horses and cattle. They were building a legacy, not just of land and money, but of values and traditions that would be carried forward for generations. One evening in the spring of 1910, Xavier and Helena walked together to the place where they had first met, where Helena's old cabin still stood, now used for storage. The creek burbled nearby, and the prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, dotted with wildflowers. They were both in their mid-50s now, their children grown and their grandchildren thriving, their ranch a success by any measure. "You remember that day?" Xavier asked, gesturing to the spot where Helena had once knelt with her river rocks. "Every detail," Helena said. "I remember how tired I was, how hopeless everything felt, and then I heard your wagon coming and my whole life changed." "I was so nervous," Xavier admitted. "I wanted any excuse to talk to you, but I was afraid you would send me away. When you agreed to let me bring you the Millstone, I felt like the luckiest man alive." "You brought me more than a millstone," Helena said, echoing words she had spoken many times over the years. "You brought me hope and love, and a future I never imagined I could have." Xavier pulled her close, and they stood there wrapped in each other's arms, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The Millstone had been the beginning, but their love had carried them through decades of challenges and triumphs, creating a life richer than either had dared to dream. As the sun set over the Colorado prairie, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Xavier and Helena walked hand in hand back to the home they had built together. Their children and grandchildren were gathering for Sunday supper, a tradition they had established years ago and maintained faithfully. The house would be full of love and laughter, of multiple generations coming together to share a meal and each other's company. Helena thought about the young widow she had been 32 years ago, grinding corn with river rocks and wondering how she would survive. She thought about the young man who had seen her struggling and offered help without expecting anything in return. And she thought about how a single act of kindness, a gift given freely, had blossomed into this rich, full life. "Thank you," she whispered to Xavier as they reached their porch. "For what?" he asked, though he was smiling because he knew. "For seeing me," Helena said. "For the millstone, for the patience, for the love, for everything. For giving me the life I have lived, the family we have built. Thank you for all of it." Xavier kissed her forehead tenderly. "Thank you for saying yes," he replied. "For taking a chance on a stranger with a wagon. For loving me back. For building this life with me. I would not trade a single moment of our life together for anything in the world." They went inside to join their family, to share the evening meal and the warmth of being surrounded by people they loved. The Millstone sat in the barn, a silent monument to where it all began, and as the years continued to pass, it remained there, a reminder to future generations of the Ortiz family about how love could start with a simple gesture of kindness and grow into something magnificent. Xavier and Helena lived long lives, blessed with health and happiness, and the love of their large, thriving family. They saw the world change around them, saw automobiles replace horses, saw electricity and telephones come to their ranch, saw Platteville grow from a dusty frontier town into a proper community with schools and churches and a hospital. Through it all, they remained devoted to each other, their love a constant in a changing world. When Xavier passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1925 at the age of 72, Helena was devastated but grateful for the 47 years they had shared together. She lived another 10 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of whom carried forward the values and traditions she and Xavier had established. She spent her final years telling stories about the early days, about grinding flour with river rocks, about the cowboy who brought her a millstone on his wagon and changed her life forever. The ranch remained in the Ortiz family for generations, a testament to the vision and hard work of its founders. The millstone was preserved as a family heirloom, passed down along with the story of how Xavier and Helena met, a reminder that sometimes the most profound love stories begin with the simplest acts of kindness. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered across the Colorado prairie, it seemed to carry echoes of their love, timeless and enduring, a legacy that would never be forgotten. Their story became legend in Platteville, told and retold as an example of what true partnership looked like, of what love could build when two people respected and supported each other. The house they had built together still stood, expanded and modernized but maintaining its essential character, home to Ortiz family members who honored their ancestors by living according to the principles Xavier and Helena had established: hard work, integrity, kindness, and above all, love. The millstone remained in its place of honor, carefully maintained and never forgotten, a symbol of how a gift given freely and a heart open to possibility could create ripples that extended far beyond the original moment. Helena's great-great-grandchildren would eventually learn the story, would touch the smooth stone surface and try to imagine their ancestor grinding corn with river rocks, would marvel at the cowboy who saw a woman in need and chose to help her. And in that way, Xavier and Helena's love story never really ended. It lived on in the family they created, in the land they cultivated, in the values they passed down, and in the simple truth that love, real love, begins not with grand gestures but with seeing another person's humanity and choosing to respond with kindness. That was the legacy of the millstone, the true gift that Xavier had given Helena all those years ago in the summer of 1878. And it was a gift that kept giving, generation after generation, a light that would never go out.